we're seeing a lot more gun crime in neighborhoods that traditionally weren't used to it.
Police services are going to say, well, we need more money to police these communities. The only answer can't be incarceration. It can't just be more policing. It takes relationships. It takes sustained effort over a long period of time to make meaningful change.
More incarceration, worse incarceration, inhumane conditions do not seem to interrupt the cycle of gangs and violence. What do you think is actually going to work, or what do you see working?
In this sense,
welcome back to another episode of Who Judges the Judge, the podcast intended to make you question the way you judge the world around you. I'm so excited for today's guest. This is Solitair, an absolute legend in the hip-hop community for a very long time, but someone who is also incredibly influential in trying to help youth in his community make better choices, both in and out of the prison system, with his project called The F Word. And no, it's not the F word you're thinking of, and we are going to get to speak to that as well. Solitair, thank you so much for making the time to come down. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you.
Absolutely. I think it was good. I met you a couple of times, just really briefly, but then we connected on Friday, Ricky Dredd's podcast.
Yes.
And that was a good conversation. So I'm definitely looking forward to this too.
It was a great conversation, and I loved just how open and honest you were. And you also, thread the line on a couple of different worlds. And that just helps to inform the way that you approach this entire conversation of trying to help, especially youth in this city, which is truly amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, it's important, man. It's important work. And I don't think that, there's a lot of people in a lot of different communities across the city that are working day and night to make a difference. And it just needs a lot more consideration from the system, from the government. So I think we have to step up the level of conversations that we're having.
How do you think we do that? This conversation, because as a defense lawyer, I am always asked, oh, what's wrong with kids today? And how do we fix this? And I get, parents who come to me with their kids having been charged gun, drug-related offenses. And I say, I don't know what went wrong. How do I, what do I do to help? And there's only so much I can say. Before we started recording, we were talking about the incredible work of the now late Louis March, who was instrumental in fighting gun violence in this city.
A true warrior. Yeah.
He was unbelievable. He would show up in front of government. He would show up at community centers. He would show up everywhere.
And the thing is that's most incredible is he used to take the bus everywhere. It's not even like he drove. When I found that out, I was like, there's no, if your purpose is aligned and you're really about making a change, like that's the level of investment. So he was completely committed to communities across the city. So a huge loss, but his legacy is definitely up to us to continue to push forward with. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's a conversation that I feel like we really need to continue.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
There were two things. I remember the first time I listened to him, we were speaking on a panel together. And he stood up in front of this group and he said, Toronto doesn't have a gun problem. The only place that has a gun problem are specific communities inside of Toronto. Regent Park has a gun problem. Jane and Finch has a gun problem. But Rosedale doesn't have a gun problem.
Right.
Forest Hill doesn't have a gun problem. So we can't say all of Toronto has a gun problem. Right. But what we need to do is focus on the communities that do and solve those underlying issues.
Right.
And it was, the first time that anyone had really broken it down by neighborhood. And it hit hard. It's not something that was overlooked by anyone, but to have someone in the community talk about specific communities that were suffering versus those that weren't. And we needed to look on the underlying problem.
Yeah, because on the ground, people understand. They understand what it is. And then there's the semantics of media and like headlines and clickbait and, that really dilutes what the real story is, what the real root causes are, because we've known what they are and have been for years, right? So it's just, it's funny. I was actually just listening to this podcast. It was a CBC podcast, but they were talking about the idea of narrative and how narrative is used to influence what people think about situations. And in Toronto, as much as there's online, it's still a pretty centralized media landscape as far as shaping the narrative about what's the issue. So there's a gun problem in Toronto. It's like, okay, that's the headline, but what does that really mean? So I think it's, Louis did a great job of breaking it down, but it's not like they didn't know,
For
especially when
sure.
you're talking about like the people that he's advocating to,
Right.
which is the government, the people who are making the policy. So
What strikes me is for a long time, he was right. Gun
mhm,
violence stayed within certain communities, and sometimes it was perpetrated from one community to the next, but, it would bounce between Scarborough to Jane and Finch
yeah,
to Moss Park to Regent Park. Now we're seeing a lot more gun crime in neighborhoods that traditionally weren't used to it.
yeah,
Just this last weekend, a man was killed in his own home in front of his own family by 3 armed intruders.
hmm
And I'm now getting a lot of inquiries from people in Vaughan, for example, in North York, people in Forest Hill that want to understand how to protect themselves because they're worried
yeah,
about gun crime, specifically home invasions now happening
hmm
to them.
hmm
Do you think the fact that gun crime is no longer insulated in certain communities and is now sort of impacting people in other areas that were not traditionally prone to it might affect how the government treats this issue?
Oh, most definitely. Of course.
Yeah.
Safety is the biggest concern for people who's, you know, spent their money and are living in communities that are supposed to be, immune
Right.
from this problem. So, and that's typically the most politically engaged, the most involved in, calling their local counselors and being, putting the pressure on them to say, what are we going to do about this? And then the reaction, like, what the chain of events is going to be. Then they're going to bring it to council. Police services are going to say, well, we need more money to police these communities. So the answer is always going to be something that is kind of reactive, not proactive. So, yeah, for sure. I can see, and that's also to say the concern is valid. There's no discounting that. We understand that people want to feel safe in their homes. And how do you combat? And of course, it's being reported a lot more too. And not just in the news, but then on social media, takes on a life of its own. And then the
Totally.
narrative completely gets, not that it's not dangerous, but it gets a little bit slightly blown out of proportion and, fear and consumption.
Even that one story that I just mentioned about the guy in Vaughan, that story has really shifted throughout the weekend. When the police first reported it, it was
Mm,
a targeted shooting at a
right.
home
Yeah.
in Vaughan, and it was only as the family started speaking out where it came out that, wait a second, this was actually armed intruders,
hmm
and, a gun was held to the daughter's head, forcing the husband to try to give up his valuables, and when he
hmm
didn't, apparently, he was shot in front of his family.
hmm
And it's come out in pieces throughout the weekend,
hmm
and now, of course, fear is spread amongst the community to the
hmm
point that I have, you know, individuals in that community who are, reaching out to me and asking how they get licensed to have firearms.
Which is bringing about that whole new conversation about, the right to defend your household. And
Yes.
yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. But
Now you work with youth that are in custody and reintegrating into society. Is that right?
yes, yes.
Can you, tell us a little bit about how you started this project and what it's evolved into?
It's called the Forgiveness Project. We call it the FU Project, kind of as a way to, you know, it's a little bit of marketing involved there
Of
to
course.
to kind of get the conversation started about forgiveness. This year it'll be 15 years. It was started by
Oh,
Tara Muldoon. She's the executive director. Um, it was started initially from her experiences in the criminal justice system and her wanting to create a space to provide support for other women who have experienced similar circumstances. She had actually, in her work, gotten a grant to publish a series of books about forgiveness. For the third book, they were working on this idea of doing a book that was focused on male authors because the previous two was more catered towards female authors. And then I wrote the outro for that book. That's how we connected initially. And then the relationship kind of just grew from there. She had gotten a call from Toronto South Detention Center. They were looking for programs for their inmates, and the journey began. And we started doing work in jails. We've been doing that for the past 10 years now. Moved on to doing programs in federal prison as well, because of the the impact that we've had with the guys that we work with, we were able to get into a partnership with the city of Toronto for an initiative called Towards Peace.
Okay.
So Towards Peace is basically Towards Peace, and it is a program that was designed to try to interrupt violence in the community by having dedicated workers that have been referred impacted youth to work with them on trying to, redirect their lives, address some of the challenges that they face. In some cases, there are guys who have been released from prison, and some cases, they're youth who have been victims of gun violence, or there's a whole series of criteria. So that's how we got into this actual in-community work, and that has been just for the past couple of years, like going into a year and a half now since we've been doing that.
And is it working? Like, are you seeing success, right? Because I have two sort of arguments that I'm constantly inundated with, right? Everyone from the community that's on a ground level and understands root causes of violence wants more programming for young men, more counseling, education, employment opportunities,
Right.
all of the sort of social services that would help interrupt that cycle of violence and gangs. And then I've got another sort of group who just wants to send everybody to jail for as long as possible and make the situation in jail absolutely miserable to try to send a message of deterrence.
Yeah.
I don't know that that's working. It's certainly not, if we take, what's happening in the U.S. as an example. More incarceration, worse incarceration, inhumane conditions do not seem to interrupt the cycle of gangs and violence because they're still flourishing.
Right.
And so I don't think that works, but there's a huge outcry from people in our society that want that. And then there's an equal number of voices who just want to interrupt the cycle in a positive way. What do you think is actually going to work, or what do you see working?
In this sense, it's not a product. It's literally we're trying to shift and transform the whole culture of the way that people live their lives, raise their kids, put food on the table, put a roof over their head. And poverty is a real thing. Mental health is a real thing. And there's a lot of social challenges that need to be addressed in different levels. So what I'm doing is impactful in a way, but it's a process. At the end of the day, I'm a mentor that provides resources, that provides support for some of the most kind of affected young people. But there's a lot to their lives other than, me working with them. They still have to wake up. They still have to, in some cases, go to school. They still have to hang with their friends. There's nothing that I can meaningfully change in a month, 6 months. So everybody's circumstances are different. So the work is really in building relationships, providing meaningful, culturally relevant support by people with lived experience, by people with an understanding and a love and devotion for that community. It doesn't necessarily have to be criminal lived experience. It could just be living in the community and having a knowledge base that can help support, building community, building opportunities. Employment and housing are the biggest challenges. So it is working incrementally, but what it needs is time. It needs time and way more resources, way more people, because, I'm only working with a small amount of people. Scarborough is hundreds of thousands of families potentially that are impacted by community violence and gangs and such. So how do you address that? It's a cultural shift. There's and I think part of the difficult conversation is accountability for things that we aren't doing in our community too. Like it's not just about fighting outward. If you're asking people in government and systems to be held accountable, which they should, then we also have a hold accountability to ourselves, as far as like what we're perpetrating among ourselves too. So there's a lot to it, and I really see it as as generational work, because it's not something that's going to occur over a year. It could take potentially like 5 years of building relationships with the right people, so that a lot of the kids that are gravitating towards gang and gun violence and these social ills see a real valid option that they can choose that is viable, and you can say, listen, you can go that path or you can go this path, and with the right guidance, and if there's any learning issues, we can help you address those. If there's any living conditions, we can try to work something that you are able to do this. Chances are they're going to, at least, you're going to get some, but some are not. That's the reality of community, and there's a lot of other factors that are involved in that as well. So clearly it's complex, and I'm just one person, and I'm not here as some super experience. I have my personal experience that I could use anecdotally and tell you.
Right.
But there's a whole wealth of knowledge of other, army of community workers that can tell you to the same thing in different ways and different experiences. So it's got to be multifaceted.
And I think there's a lot who are. I think that there's a lot of community outreach that is happening.
Oh, definitely.
But everybody's doing it in sort of these silos where they're helping sort of the small fraction that they can reach.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it needs to be bigger, and it needs to be on a wider scale.
Yeah. And I think that is what Towards Peace can be. Right. It's a work in process, as far as how it's being rolled out. It's been rolled out in stages. It was started in the West End. Now, for the past year and a half, it's been in the East End in certain communities. But again, very limited resources as far as the communities that we're trying to serve. So right. I think it's a step in the right direction, but it's got to be something that is more ingrained and kind of baked into the system, like the ambulance service, like Toronto Police Service, like the school board. These are things that are in place with its flaws and all, but that it's going to be there. This needs to be something that is headed in that direction.
An interesting comparison to put it to, ambulance services. But it's true. We have a service available for people who are injured and need to be brought to hospital. Why don't we have the same sort of concrete service available for people that we can see are slipping towards criminality, slipping towards gang life, street life, and try to interrupt that cycle before it happens?
Yeah. And that, to me, is indication of actually trying to meaningfully address the issues that these communities face, because it's been well documented at this point. Like, we're rehashing stuff that, we've been talking about this since the 90s, and it's the same problems. It's just a new generation. Why is that?
Right.
A lot of it to do is some of the systemic challenges, for sure. But a lot of it is stuff that we also have to heal as a community as well. And we have to provide resources to support that healing process, which is messy, right? But
it takes a long time. Yeah. And I almost think like part of the problem is the government just can't be bothered to invest in the long term, right? Because they're not going to actually see results within this, election cycle. Well, they're not going to be able to say, we cured, 100,000 people with this amount of money. But they can say we incarcerated 100,000 people with all of this influx of money and therefore made your streets safer, which it's not making them safer because everyone's coming out.
That's the problem with data. That's the problem with collecting data, because if you want to collect data, the data is there. And obviously things change over time. So it's like the cultural influences are going to be different, all that kind of stuff. But if you care enough as a society to really address it, the only answer can't be incarceration. It can't just be more policing. And it can't just be, we'll give you some support, but you have a year to figure it out, or you have 2 years to figure it out. It's like, no, that's not how it works, right? That's not how culture shifts. It takes time. It takes relationships. It takes a sustained effort over a long period of time to make meaningful change. And everybody knows that. It's, it's not rocket science, but anyway.
You've been on this sort of, I say journey, but you've been on this quest to help your community for a very long time, since at least 2001.
Yeah.
And that came about because you had, I understand, it's a cousin who was shot and killed.
Yes. So it was a song called Easy to Slip.
Yes.
And at that time in my life, I didn't grow up in, I would say, we were like lower middle class, I guess you could say, but
in what area? What community did you grow up
Dufferin
in?
and St. Clair. I didn't grow up in the hood. That's the thing. I grew up in the mostly Italian neighborhood. My mom and my dad, 2 sisters, brothers. So my life, for all intents and purposes, I was a happy kid that had, whatever regular family problems. But what I found, and especially reflecting back on, is we used to go to visit my other cousins. Some lived in Jane and Woolner. Some lived in Malvern. Some lived in all these neighborhoods that I wasn't even aware of until reflecting on like, yo, this a little, I don't know if I would want to live here,
Okay.
But it never really resonated with me until like that year, my cousin was murdered.
How old were you?
About 20, like in my early 20s.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so you made it through your teens. You didn't get in trouble yourself. You weren't someone who was involved. You went to
not
school,
really.
did things like the right way.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or the right way, I just lived my life. It was
Right.
it was what was
But you
was
stayed out of
provided
gang
for
life.
me.
You stayed out of
And I wouldn't even say that I stayed out of it. It was just never really presented to me in that way because of my circumstances. That was not the environment. And I went to school. I think, going back a little bit with my history, the first person that kind of became my foray into music with was this dude named Marvel, who was my first friend. And then he lived downtown, and he was the first person that I knew that lived in the projects. So, but I would spend a lot of time down there. And then we got into music, and that was just the direction. We were always into music. So that was our focus. That was our passion. That was where we invested most of our time with. Some of the OGs that became involved was through Socrates, his managers. And they also protected us from that as well. They're like, you guys are talented artists, so you're going to do music. We're going to invest in your music. So it was never really something that was like, am I going to go to the street? And I didn't have a reason to.
How do you either contrast or compare that to what's happening in the music industry in Toronto now? Because now, like, Toronto hip hop is in some ways a source of a lot of clashes.
Oh, most definitely.
It's a source of a lot of violence. And it's a way that the police are conducting their police investigations is through hip hop.
Yeah.
So where did that shift happen? That when you were growing up, music took you away from even the threat of being involved in that world to now, youth who are trying to explore music as a way to either get out of the community, make their lives better, find fortune and fame if they've got the talent to do so. But that world is actually dragging them into the streets.
The most obvious thing is it's different times. It's different technology. It's different. Like the value of music is completely different. The way people consume music is different. The impact of the culture is a world of difference from the way that we consume music back in the day.
Okay.
There were some people would call them gatekeepers, but there were some people would call them tastemakers. At that time, there was a pipeline to getting access to being played and being heard on. If college radio DJs weren't playing your songs, if DJs weren't playing your songs at clubs or at different venues, nobody was hearing your music.
Right.
Whereas now, somebody who wants clout, nowadays you could do it by the end of the day, you could release a song.
Yes.
I can buy you equipment in the morning and you could put out a song, or depending on how your work ethic is, you could put out a project within 24 hours. So it's become a way for people who didn't really do their 10,000 hours to develop a talent, learn how to make beats, how to invest thousands of dollars into equipment, learning how to use the equipment, running a studio. I came from the era when you had to record to 2-inch tape, so there's no digital. Right. So it was like there was a process to being good. That's why I think, ratio-wise, there was more talented artists invested in becoming better in this and that era than there is now, because it's a sense of immediacy. Everybody now it's like AI can write your raps, or you can have a ghostwriter, somebody can make a beat using all these different platforms. You don't even need to really, really hone your talent. Everything is kind of catered towards saying, yeah, you could be an artist. So that's one of the main differences. And then the impact and the influence of social media and people trying to attain, like you said, this status of being perceived as a celebrity, as a big rapper, as a gangster rapper, or as a big time, whoever you want to be. You can really curate that narrative in a way that we couldn't. You know what I mean? Like, you had to be good.
Right.
DJs had to play your record. Well, not even that they had to play your record. They would only play your record if
you
was
were good. And
right?
if you weren't played by them, nobody ever discovered you.
And then that became oh, they're hating, or they're only these DJs are like, we're, because that was also a big story too. Like, back in the day, people used to accuse us of like blackballing them and saying, don't play their record, play our record. We're like, half the time, people who played my record, Easy to Slip, most of them I didn't even know had my record. They got it because of, at the time I was managed by Mr. Morgan. And he like literally serviced like boxes. We carried boxes of the single. He mailed them out. Whatever you use,
like Canada Post, like mail,
like
mail.
shipping.
Wow,
shipping. So that costs thousands. Pressing the vinyl cost thousands. Mixing the record cost thousands. That record was actually mixed by Gadget, who works with Drake now and like legendary engineer in the city, like. Renowned.
It's amazing record. Like even to prepare for this interview, like I watched the video last night too, just to like refresh. And I remember when it came out. I remember hearing that song. Like
so it literally took thousands of dollars to do that, whereas now you could probably do it for under $200.
And how do you think that has impacted, or why do you think that has impacted the level of violence that we're seeing associated to hip hop? Or do you think that those who are involved in hip hop are just reflecting on what they see around them, and that's their means of expressing some of the frustration that they're feeling in the community?
Yeah, some are, some aren't. See, the impact of the influence of the music, it's tied to culture too. It's tied to media, like mainstream media. It's tied to record labels and what they're signing and what they're promoting. Like the rabbit hole really goes deep, and that's why it needs to be a much more open conversation within the community too. There's the external factors are well documented, and we're always working to address them. But you got to look in-house too. And the culture, and at a level that's beyond the artists, and whether it's the people who are controlling the algorithms on social media and what kind of gets boosted and what people are sharing. You can address that issue. That's definitely impacting it. But it's also, you can curate your feed and say, what, where did this post come from? This is not for me.
Right.
It's also the people that are drawn to this too. Like that's why people, if everybody's like, I like drilling music is dead. I don't want to hear another young black youth talk about killing another black youth. We're off that. Nobody's going to rap about it anymore because the streams are going to go, it's going to be reflected in the success that they attain. Right. But the fact that there's, whether it's a real success or an online success, which is another conversation, the fact that it's successful is also because people want to hear that shit. People gravitate, like people want to see the train crash when so-and-so rapper is posting this controversial thing. I'm in his hood and filming videos. People are watching that.
Yes.
Right? My issue is, there are people in the community that are watching that, but it's very real for them. But then there's the generation, the other fans that are just like, it literally just sheer entertainment for them. And they're taking sides because there's absolutely no repercussions for their buying into it. And that's one of the biggest problems with hip hop culture, that we have to see, if we have to find a way to corral the influence and the impact of the music to channel it to more productive ends. Right. But there's a lot of things we have to address before we get to that, before we're able to impact that.
Do you think that's all one conversation though? Like how we address gun violence, how we address what people are drawn to, what people are gravitating towards, because obviously like people are producing what others are gravitated towards because that's what gets them the likes, the followers, the boost that they need to be more successful. But, if I think back to hip hop as it was 30 years ago, there was very little violence. And if there was violence, being discussed, like I think back to even like NWA that, went through, like started the crazy censorship of hip hop music and really drew the ire of the U.S. government at one point. It was more anti-police and it was a response to what they experienced in their communities. Yeah. Whereas today, we're seeing in the criminal justice system young men whose music is being used to prosecute them, which I find frightening. As an artist, like when you hear about that happening, what are your thoughts?
See, this is
as an artist and a community member, because you also wear a few different hats.
This is a conversation that I think needs to be separate. It needs to be kind of like behind closed doors in community.
Okay.
Like I said, when it comes to the systemic challenges and the courts using lyrics and saying that, it's my artistic integrity, it's my freedom of speech to say what I want in my music,
Right.
right? And again, this is also how do you discern who is really just they're really like they call us like the CNN of the ghetto, so to speak. That was one of the things that rappers were called. Like they were the journalists of the ghetto. They were
Right.
telling the stories of what was happening in the streets. But even back then, there were still rappers who were like, oh, so and so said that, but he ain't really from that. He hurt his brothers, that what they were saying. Like even when the whole Hov versus Nas beef, like Nas was like, yo, I showed you your tech on the dresser,
Right.
and next thing you know, he's talking about all that. So it's like there's always been that thing about who's real. Are you really from that? Do you really do that? That's in the culture.
Right.
So to now in an era where there's literally guys, it's been proven time and time again. And let me just pause to say that I want to really emphasize that this is a fraction of what hip hop is about. Like there's so many other artists that are exploring, expanding the culture, not just focus on this gangster shit. Gangster shit is one genre of hip hop. So I want to emphasize that. So I'm talking about this genre of gangster hip hop and drill hip hop or whatever, right? So I want to clarify that by saying that part of that code was, yo, I really lived this life and this is what I really did. We didn't respect those who were like, yo, I'm only doing it because it sounds good and it's for entertainment. So now when your words are being highlighted and they're saying, oh, it says in your rap that you did this. Now all of a sudden it's like, yo, this is entertainment. This ain't real. This is just what the fans want to see. And I'm just an entertainer and it's freedom of speech and it's artistic integrity. And I'm with all that. I'm for free speech, but you cannot ask for free speech and then freedom from accountability at the same time. And that's the way I see it. If you don't want your lyrics to be held in court against you, then don't say it. Don't say anything that you could be held accountable for, even if it's entertaining. If it's entertaining, how are you clarifying that to the audience? That they know that this is entertainment. I mean, there's famously, and maybe I have to like do my research, but this was a story that I heard, and maybe, and I'm not sure if it's 100% factual, but even if you look at it anecdotally, there was a story that somebody had asked Future, do you really do 40 Xans and 40 nights? He's like, I don't really do drugs like that. That's just what the fans want to see.
Right.
I completely disagree with that, but he clarified that. And he stands on that. I think that's, culturally, influence-wise, that's a huge problem, but that's another discussion. Right? That's like freedom of speech. Yeah, you could rap about, I do Xannies, I pop pills, I sip syrup, and it's just entertainment. I'm not responsible for what your kids do or say. You shouldn't be letting them listen to my music as parents. And it's like parents they're not going to babysit them 24 hours a day. They're going to be with their friends.
And they can't anymore, which ties back to sort of what you were talking about the evolution of music as an industry.
Precisely.
Because you cannot police what everyone's looking at on social media. Like it's fed to you, literally.
So I say that to say, for you to put this onus on the responsibility for the influence of your music on families and communities and say, listen, I'm making millions. That's what the people want to hear. So I don't care what people say. You got to take care of yourself. Then okay, you're trying to absolve yourself of responsibility. You just want to have your cake and eat it too.
Right.
And I don't respect that in music. It's like, take a side and stick with it. But the fact of the matter is, I tell people all the time, I'm like, you don't believe in role models, that's fine. But the fact of the matter is, if you have a platform, you're influencing people. That's why people are listening to you. That's why you have the platform, is because people take you at your word. They're influenced by your style. They're influenced by your lyrics. They're influenced by your message. That's why you have fans. So to then turn around and say, it's not my responsibility for my influence, it's like, well, then get out of music then. If you don't care, if it's just about the money, right? Or accept the fact that you're destroying people's lives. I understand the argument for those who are really being artists, but I feel most people are just using it to say, I could say what I want and it's not my fault. And then when they're held accountable, it's like all of a sudden it's entertainment. I'm not buying that personally. I'm not saying that, yes, they should, these courts should use their music against them outright, but I'm also looking at the other side and saying, what are you willing to do to be held accountable? When is accountability your problem too?
It's an interesting,
It's real,
viewpoint
though.
to have. It is real.
And it's
It is
and
real,
it's me.
but it's
It's me talking not to the culture from external, like from a system. I'm
Right.
from the culture. I'm
I
telling
know.
you what I see and like the real conversations we have. I've had conversations with guys in jail who straight up said hip hop ruined my life. What do you tell that guy? And he bought in.
Right.
He bought into the image and the lifestyle and that, and then he was in jail and he's like on a one-a-ways, because that's the thing. Not necessarily in a group of people,
Right.
but on a one-a-ways, he's like straight up, like really and truly. When I look back on it, hip hop made me make some real bad decisions in my time, and that's real. So the impact, the influence is real. What you do with it, that's your freedom.
I think for me, like when I'm wearing my defense lawyer hat, the biggest source of frustration and sort of sadness I feel is there's this sort of ideology that jail is a stripe to be wearing. And a lot of guys are like, oh, yeah, I can do that time, standing on my head.
Where does
No
that
problem.
Where does that come from? Where does that
I
come
can
from?
do that. And they want to be tough until they're in. And then I get the phone call. I set up a lawyer.
Shit is real.
Lawyer call. And, Miss, I can't be in here. Miss, you got to get me out.
Shit is real. That's right.
And I would, love to be able to do that for everyone that I'm representing, obviously. Like that's my job. But it makes me sad when I represent young men who haven't yet been to jail and think that it's soft time. And it's like 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, however many years you're doing that you think is soft, and it change you as a person. Like 2 years in custody changes people.
Terrible.
In ways that some can't come back from.
Yes.
And I often throw that argument out. A lot of conservative friends who just want to lock everyone up and throw away the key. But we don't do that in Canada. These guys are coming out. And whether it's in 5 years, 10 years, whatever the case may be, they're coming out far worse after spending that period of time in custody. How do we break that message of, oh, this is soft time, this is easy time? Because people think that before they start serving that time, then they start serving that time and they realize the time isn't easy and the time isn't soft. And you're separated from your loved ones, you're separated from your home, you're not sleeping in a comfortable bed, you're 3 to a cell, and if you're the bottom of the hierarchy, then you're the one on the floor. Like it's not enjoyable. How does that message get interrupted?
Well, here's the thing. In the work that we do, and that is the real challenge, that where there's some people that I work with that have an understanding, either they've been to jail and are out, so there's a perspective, or they're in a community that they see it around them, but they also have the self-awareness that they don't want that for themselves.
Right.
Like getting them to see that, there's a West Indian saying, it's probably said in different ways, but those who can't hear must feel. And in my work, the one thing that I reckon with is you can only provide the opportunity. You can't make them make that choice unless they're ready to make it, or they've experienced something that they're like, yo, once bitten, twice shy. I went to jail and I don't want to go back to that.
Right.
But then there's those who are like, jail is a stripe for them. And they are capable of holding their own in there. And they've kind of had their mind hardened to the realities of life. So that is a choice. So they're dealing with that. And as a man, I respect that. You knew what this life entailed. You took the risk. To them, it's like, yeah, it's part of the risk. So it is what it is. I go back, and next thing, when I go back out, I'm gonna do things differently. I'm gonna move how I move, but I'm gonna be quieter. I'm gonna keep less friends. That is an individual who has made a decision about the life that they want for themselves. And as a man, I say, yo, respect for that, because you are willing to, what the risks are, and you're making that choice, an informed choice. That's hard to combat, and that's somebody that has to go through their life's journey and figure out that, I don't want this anymore. And typically, the older they get, the less inclined they are, the more betrayals they've experienced, the more money they realize how much they spent on lawyers, right?
Yes.
How much they've spent on like other things. And like now this lifestyle, this little life that they were enjoying, now it's all gone and now they're in jail. So it's like they had to live that experience and now they're like, okay, I need to figure out something different.
Right.
And then the challenge becomes like, well, what does that different look like? And it's time and hard work and sacrifice and like swallowing your pride to get a little job. You're working for a boss. Like it's a lot to adjust to. So the only thing we can do is provide resources. And I will say that there are a lot of resources, not enough for everybody. And that's what we need to work on, you know, but it's gotta be a sustained long-term effort where everybody buys into the process on a government level. And we have to explain that narrative to the conservatives too, who are just like, lock them up. It's like, well, what do you think what they're doing when they're inside? What do you think happens? And do you think that, okay, they probably just want them locked up indefinitely. That's probably where they're going with it, is like, it's because as long as they're in jail, they're not trying to do home invasions. Well, unfortunately,
it's part of that. And I think a lot of them think that like they're learning in jail that they don't want to go back to jail. And unfortunately, I think a lot of guys come out from jail much more hardened. And some of them are traumatized. I've had clients that have told me that, you know, their first jail stint, they listened to people getting killed on the range. They listened to, you know, the noise of other people being significantly assaulted, abused, and that sits with them. And they tell me that they've never been able to cope or get out of that mindset.
Right.
But, you know, enough entries on your criminal record can prevent someone from getting a job, from volunteering, from getting housing now. I understand that some landlords are asking for criminal records before renting out to people. And so even when they reach a point where they want to do different and they're ready to do different, those choices that they've been making since their youth, sometimes, you know, 5, 10, 15 years, prevent them from actually doing different.
So that's why the goal has got to be getting them before they get into the system. That's part of what our work entails. But again, it's, you know, really and truly with the numbers that we're operating at, we're kind of pissing in the wind until we get a more collective investment. Like, you know, I'll put it out into the atmosphere. But one of my, I guess, like dreams or visions would be like the programs that we're working on need to be in a building, like an office building like this, the same way that there's schools, because it needs to be a team of different people, like, you know, therapists, teachers, people from the community with lived experience that are advocating for the residents. But it needs to be a school, like a school, day to day, where we're constantly working on how do we address these issues, because it's not going to get any easier the more we keep kicking the can down the road. So
it's interesting. I just had that conversation with two other lawyers. One is a Crown attorney, one who has left sort of the profession to go do policy work for the government because she just can't stand watching the revolving door and being a part of pushing it forward constantly. And we talked about, you know, what drug treatment court looks like right now, because drug treatment court at the courthouses that have it, which aren't even a lot, but those that do, it sort of runs like a weekly check-in. And so you've got these drug addicts that show up and they say whether or not they've been sober for that week. And, you know, they're obviously praised if they were, and they're not kicked out if they weren't, but okay, do better for the next week. You know, and they're in these programs for 6 months or a year and a half, and it's just not enough time and it's not enough intensity to make a real meaningful impact on most people, and especially now what we're seeing with fentanyl addiction, which is obviously through the roof in most communities, if not all communities across Ontario.
Right.
And
who's held accountable for that on another level? But
for what?
For the fentanyl crisis,
epidemic?
Right.
Who should be held accountable?
Who should be, yeah.
If I had to choose, I would say the Liberal government and the policies that they implemented during COVID-19.
For fentanyl?
Yeah. Fentanyl went through the roof when the Liberal government decided to give $2,000 a month to people who never had $2,000 a month before. drug addicts who never had access to that kind of money on a regular basis, and small time sort of corner boys who are now putting their funds together, and they were investing in larger quantities in ways I had never seen, in ways that did not exist before, and in ways that no longer required the hierarchy of gangs that kept people in order. Like, there was an order to things before COVID. Like, you couldn't just walk up on a block and start shooting people. Like, there was permissions to be asked. There was politics that needed to be worked out before that was happening.
That's the first time I've heard that take, and I'm not. I have to take that in. That's
We saw it.
I never really
Like, those of us in the system saw kids that never had access to the money that would allow them to buy guns now buying significant firearms that we just hadn't.
So what was
seen.
fentanyl like before? Because that's a world that I'm not like. Addiction is not. I know addicts. There's been some at our program, but that's not what we address.
Right.
Like, we try to find. We will navigate, try to find support for that. So a little insight into like how long before COVID, like, because I feel like they were talking about the fentanyl crisis even before that.
For sure they were. I mean, in the States, it was huge well before. Here, I think we started really seeing, I think I had my first fentanyl case in like 2011 or 2012 when it was the patches that were being sort of abused, that were provided with people. And then, the formulas shifted.
Yeah.
We were seeing like oxycodone, and then oxys came out with like a gel cap that was supposed to be impenetrable, but everyone melted them down and was able to like shoot them and smoke them. Right. And so we started seeing it come up, but it was really expensive for people. Heroin was really expensive, and so we weren't seeing much of it. And then all of a sudden fentanyl just flooded the market in ways that nobody expected. And then it was in everything. Police were seizing what they thought was crack. They were sending it for testing, and
that's when
it was cocaine, and it was
about
coming back with some fentanyl in it.
Yeah.
We started seeing cases where MDMA had fentanyl in it, which was obviously like really scary because those are kids that are not signed up for that.
Right.
So
I think that I have a story, like just some people that I knew. I'm not even going to say where I knew them from, but they were telling me we were supposed to meet up somewhere. And then, since I'm laughing now because everybody's okay, but I guess they were having a little bit of a shindig.
Yes.
Expecting, like you said, what they were supposed to be buying.
Right.
But apparently they found out, and they all went to the emergency room and found out that it was fentanyl in whatever it was that we were getting. And I was like, that's pretty wild. That's pretty wild. But what reason why I was kind of getting at is the crisis was created by these billion-dollar pharmaceutical companies.
Yes.
We know that it's a crisis. Who is on their side is being held accountable for that?
Well, they paid their way out of accountability by the millions. They were,
because they could afford to do it.
Of course,
right?
yeah.
And I think when we start talking about addictions and stuff like that, we talk and then we compare that to what's happening in community. There's always the community has to be held accountable, but we also understand that we see what people in power get away with when they have money. The scales don't balance out when these kids are being these low-level drug dealers are being held accountable for the drugs they're selling, but there's a whole hierarchy of billions and millions of dollars that are facilitating the drug trade in a way that people understand that there's an underworld.
Yes.
There's an underworld, and there's people who are like, listen, squares do the square thing and we'll do our thing. Like, these are conversations that I've had with people. So like, again, I might have kind of been digressing from the original topic, but I say that to say there's so many different nuances to the work that we do to be considered. And that's why it's something that needs to be done in a way that you can see that people are actually invested in changing the circumstances at the root causes. like the root cause of addiction, the root cause of violence. And there's a lot of layers to it that it's kind of like, we're not going to capture into this hour podcast, you know what I mean? But yeah, there's I definitely appreciate that insight about how it went up during COVID. I never even really would have thought about that in that way.
I got one more question for you. I know we're running short on time, but
I could
this
talk
is
a lot. I hope I didn't
no,
talk in
I
too much
appreciate it.
circles.
I really do.
Okay.
And I want to keep the conversation going. I may have you back again because I think there's so much we can unpack. But there's a narrative, and I want to bring you back to this because it's an important part of our discussion has been the way that you characterize the narrative that the media sells.
Yeah.
There's a more recent narrative that's coming out right now, and it's been covered by a few different newspapers. I think CBC has covered it. I know they're definitely going to because they brought me on for an interview to discuss this. Toronto Star has been covering it. There's this narrative of Black boys being trafficked from Toronto into other cities, mostly up north, but also down west. So Sarnia, Windsor, Thunder Bay, Sudbury, sort of these small towns in order to facilitate the drug trade. And the narrative being packaged is that they're being forced sort of against their will, that they're young boys who are being pulled into the drug trade unnecessarily. I've been asked about it by a number of news sources, and I think it's more an enticement than a trafficking situation. I picture trafficking. Right? I conceptualize trafficking as someone who is essentially forced against their will, and that's not what I'm seeing. But obviously, I only see a small slice of the situation, and I don't profess to see the whole picture. I'm not working with youth before they enter the system, and I don't work with young men who are exiting the system. So I'm interested, obviously without you naming names or exposing anybody, but what's your take on this narrative?
I've heard that narrative too. I have encountered some youth who have been asked to do that. And it's part of the story. I think it is something that is worthy of being spoken about. Awareness is key. But like you said, are they being forced or are they being coerced? And I think it's a spectrum depending on the circumstances, depending on that individual. Maybe there's somebody that's holding something over them and they're using that as leverage to get them to do them a favor. That happens all the time, right? In different aspects. But then there's also the lifestyle. Like, if white kids were offered the opportunity to make a quick $2,000, like white kids in the suburbs say, yo, listen, go bring this package to this place and I'll give you $2,000. That's what they'd be doing too. If they're young people, then they're not seeing the whole picture and they're living in this inner city. They're struggling for, all their kids. They see all the kids that have money and are hustling are wearing the sneakers and they're wearing the Gucci and all these brand names and they're living this lifestyle and you're, being made fun of, you're being bullied. And then somebody says, hey man, you want to come make a little money? Coercion, yeah. And they see it as something that's, you're just going to go there. All you got to do, just open the bag, just take this. And here's the person you're going to meet. All you got to do is give it to them.
Right.
So
I think that's not a new story. I mean, that's been the situation since I was, a drug addict on the streets. That's the way that the situation worked. It always, hey, take this package and run this over here. And, I'll chip you off a little piece at the end. Like that's just been the way that world has worked for a long time. So
I think what I would say to that narrative is if you are actually a journalist and you actually care about the scope of what it is involved, you would know that it's both.
Right.
Sometimes it's bullying. Sometimes it's like actually being like kidnapped and forced.
Are you seeing that?
I've heard stories. I haven't seen anything that I could speak confidently to, but I've heard through people that have witnessed both situations. Like some of like, yo, there's a situation, they have something over this person and they were forced to do it. I know somebody who did that kind of thing. Like that's what I would hear back.
Right.
So, but then it's a lot easier. They say you could track more. You attract more bees with honey than vinegar, right?
Yes.
So there's desperation, and you take advantage of that, and then there's inspiration. Make a little money. Go take. Mom, I know your mom's hurting for rent. Here, go. And then when you come back, like here's another thing for success, and then that's how you build a relationship. Again,
Right.
it's a human connection. They're looking at somebody who is providing them with resources to live, And just as an aside, it's also not like, here, take this money, save $1,500 and then spend $500. And you keep doing that and you'll have enough eventually to buy a house and get out of here. That's not what they're doing, right? So that's another part of the conversation to be had too. Like the cycle of violence and the cycle of gangs, like, there's layers.
But that's never taught in school. I remember having to find.
Oh, for sure.
I had to discover financial literacy on my own. I
1,000,000%.
luckily had my grandparents taught me how to use a credit card. Otherwise, I would never have known how to build credit, how to pay it off, how to make it work. And it's one of the key factors, I think, for success. And we don't teach that.
I didn't learn about credit per se, but I think, just speaking to the importance of culture and family and community, my dad always told me from a very young age, and it's to the point where it's like, because I was like, I didn't really care about money per se because I was a happy kid.
Right.
Content with very little, not rich by any stretch, but like I was at a house, I had food, I never wanted for any. I had needs, I can I get a car? My parents were like, I'm not buying you a car, but I never went hungry. I never remember saying, I didn't eat for a couple of days, but he always said, to the point where he didn't even want me to get a job. He's like, I'm going to give you $5 and put it in the bank. So I was learning about that even at a time when I didn't appreciate it, to now in my adult life, you hear people talking about, get life insurance. Like, I have insurance. I've had insurance from when I was, even when I didn't really care enough to understand the importance of it.
Right.
So those are the kind of lessons that we have to teach. But you're in a position, you're making money. Are you trying to change the community by flipping your money really to give youth opportunity and say, now save this money? You're not going to do what I do. I'm going to take the L. I'm going to do all the risk and do all the gangster shit so that none of the youth in my community have to do that. And I'm going to break them off money and show them how to make that money and not get into this. Is that happening? That's
I don't see that, but
it's a rhetorical question.
But
that's kind of the conversations in reality that I'm having, like on a real level. Like if we're trying to address our community issues.
And is the community responsive to that? Like
I think they would be, but I don't think that it's happening. That's kind of the point that I'm getting at. It's just the perpetuation, and what role are these people who were involved that got into it just because they didn't have opportunity, they didn't want to go to school, this was the only thing that they saw in their community, okay. But how do we shift the culture now to flip that money like the Rockefellers? They started off bootlegging and now they're and everybody's legit now.
Right.
Are we doing that? We can.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? So anyway, it's another story for another time, right?
I think this is a conversation that could definitely continue.
I think so too. Yeah,
and I really, really appreciate you making the time. If people want to learn more about you and what you're doing and the F Word project or the FU project.
It's the officially we're the Forgiveness Project.
Right.
On Instagram, it's Project F Word.
F Word.
I'm on Instagram too. I'm not a content creator, so I'm not entirely active, but I have dope shit on there already. This is
more about people being able to learn more about what you do and get involved. At the end of the day, I mean, you called it. You said this is what's needed is resources. What's needed is expansion. What's needed is more people who will take this message and help other people make better choices, or at least give them the opportunity, the knowledge that they need to make those better choices. Right. What they do with it is on them.
Right.
But the resources are definitely needed in order to grow and expand projects like this. So, people who are listening and want to get involved, like, tell them how to find you.
Yeah. So At Solitair Music on Instagram. My website is solitairmusic.com. That has the information about my music and the work that I do in community as well. But between those, you'll find me, and I also have to shout out my studio, For Sound Media. That's where my main base for music, and shouts out to my partners there. That also have a number of clients that have been there, like Cardinals recorded there. We've had legends like Snow records there. Shouts out to William De Niro and Cortez. But yeah, those would be, I guess, the main contact points for what I do and what I'm about. Solitair Music, Solitaire Solitair music. So there's no E on it like the card game. I think that people make that mistake all the time. They misspell it and add the E because of the autocorrect. So yeah, that's where you can find me. At 4 Sound Media is my studio, at the number 4 Sound Media. And Project F Word on Instagram as well. That's the Forgiveness Project. And we just recently were awarded a grant from MLSE Foundation to do a leadership and basketball skills training in federal prison. This is the first time that's actually happened.
That's amazing.
In the world. So we're piloting that right now and really working on growing that relationship with the MLSE Foundation. And we've also had a number of really significant partnerships over the years, like with OCAD University. Through OCAD, we created a creative writing program that gives inmates the opportunity to earn like a half credit to admission to OCAD University. So they would graduate, they get a student number, they have a record of having completed a course, and when they get out, if they wanted to go and fulfill the rest of the requirements to attend, OCAD has a mandate of decolonizing access to education for people that don't have, maybe they didn't graduate. They will work with, graduate from high school. Right. They'll work with you to help you get the necessary credits. And if you have experience as an artist, for example, but you didn't go to art school, they will consider that towards your admission as well. So they've been a really great supporter of the work that we do, as well as we've had support from MLSE Foundation. They also previously supported the Up the Score program that we do at federal institutions. So yeah, that's I can go on, but I think those are the main three. At Solitair Music, that's me. At Project F Word, that's for the Forgiveness Project, and at 4 Sound Media for all your recording and music production needs.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank
you so much for making the time to chat with me. I love the perspective, and I really hope that we can do more to help the initiatives that you've started here, because they truly are phenomenal, and there's so much need for them. So thank you.
I'm grateful for the platform. Thank you for your time too, and it says a lot that conversation led to this happening. So, and we need to have more of this as well. And even with a few other key players, I think that we can really have a more impactful conversation and progress.
Agreed. I think we just need a wider audience. I think that, this is a conversation that's happened so much within the community, which is amazing, but people outside of the community don't understand what's going on.
Yeah.
And the longer I have this, and the more episodes I've put out, quite frankly, of when I see what people are saying from a broad range of different communities, there's this lack of understanding between the two.
Yep.
Which isn't surprising given the polarization of humans right now. And I think that that's obviously a way to keep us divided. But if different stakeholders could come to the table and, peel back the layers of where we think the differences are, I think there's a lot more common ground.
For sure.
And a lot more way forward.
We have more things in common than we have in opposition. It's just the reality, and it's divide and conquer. When you have people fighting amongst themselves, you're not fighting the real enemy, the real issue. So happy to do it.
Amazing. Me too.
Yeah,
thank you again.